This is the BBC television service. There now follows an election broadcast on behalf of the Conservative and Unionist Party.
During this election, I've travelled right through the country. Scotland, Yorkshire, Lancashire, the Midlands, East Anglia, and of course London and the Home District, and South Wales. What has struck me throughout is how buoyant everybody is. Everyone feels that Britain is in top form, whether they're the farmers, or the men in the workshop, or in the offices. Of course, they know there's a lot of competition coming, but they're ready to face that. One thing they don't want to be is to be nationalized or controlled or messed about. They'd rather do it in their own initiative and in their own way. And then, of course, it's been rather fun to get back to the meetings with the hecklers and all that. I enjoy that. In our office, you know, we get a tremendous lot of letters all the time. Hundreds of them, sometimes thousands. They're all answered and dealt with, and the more interesting or important ones are given to me, usually in a summary. I thought it might be interesting to look at some of them. Here's one about the cost of living. Somebody who's retired writes and says, "What about the cost of living? Will it go up? Can I have any guarantee?" Well, I'm not giving any guarantee, but I can only say this. We had a great struggle to keep the cost of living down. Under the socialist government, it went up 2 shillings on the pound the last year. It went up and up. But over the last 2 years, prices have been stable. And that's an achievement. Of course, it hasn't been done without tears. It's not easily done. We've had to do a lot of unpopular things, the credit squeeze and all that. But you know, it isn't much of a government that is afraid to do what it knows to be right because of some temporary unpopularity. And at the same time, we've got full employment. 2 things together. Stable prices and full employment. It's a double. Let's keep it. Another letter. Somebody writes from Scotland and says, "It's all very well you're saying that we have full employment. We've got 3.9% rate of unemployment in Scotland. What's your answer to that?" Well, that's a perfectly fair letter from one Scot to another. It's true. The national level of unemployment is very low, 1.9%. And under all the definitions of full employment, which the pundits, including Mr. Gateskill, have always made, 3% is regarded as full employment. We have 1.9%. I don't know whether you've seen tonight's figures, but there are now today 1 million more people at work than there were 8 years ago. A rise of 100,000 since last August. Well, so much for the mass unemployment scare. But of course there are local pockets of unemployment, where for one reason or another, fashions have changed, one industry is left, and others can't get going at full speed. We've done quite a lot about it in South Wales, in Scotland, and in Lancashire. But there's more to be done, and that's why our first bill in the next Parliament is to take new powers to do it. Well, here's another. Funny, this one. It asks, "Can you assure me that the ballot is really a secret?" Now, quite a lot of people have asked me this question. I don't know what the reason is. And yet, everybody should know that the ballot is absolutely secret. You needn't tell your family. You needn't tell the man you work next to. You needn't tell the boss. You needn't tell anybody. And more than that, nobody can tell afterwards how you have voted. Well, then we've had a lot of letters about pensions. Of course, everybody tries. Every government tries to do what it can to help the old people. And I'm sure it wasn't for any lack of good intentions that the socialists failed. It was because they got the country into such trouble that they couldn't do what they'd liked to do. 5 years after 1946, prices went up and up and up, and the pension wasn't raised at all. The except a few weeks before the election of 51. But even then, the value of the pension was half a crown lower after that rise than it had been at the start. Now, under us, we've always put the pensioner a little ahead of the cost of living figure. Today, the value of the pension is 10 shillings higher in purchasing power than it has ever been. And that's deeds, not just words. It means that we've made a start on doing something all of us want, to give the pensioner a share, and a fair share, in the increasing prosperity of the country. And I give you this pledge, this personal pledge. In the next Parliament, we shall go on doing it. Well, now, so much for the letters. But there are one or two things that I want particularly to say. Naturally, we've been thinking how to maintain and improve the standard of living in the whole country. Let me read you a quotation. It's particularly interesting at the moment. A lot of people nowadays expect their standard of living to be going up all the time. That is certainly not going to be possible during the next few years. Who do you suppose said that? Mr. Gateskill, when he was Chancellor of the Exchequer in 1951. What a contrast to what he said last night and to what they've been saying throughout the election. What then has happened since 1951? I think the truth is that we have happened, that there's been a Conservative government. This defeatist statement was made 8 years ago, just before the Socialist government threw in their hand. We got prosperity all right, we all know it. Full employment, steady prices, the pound firm, good balance of payments, rising reserves, record savings. And what does it all rest on? Why, on this. Instead of spending abroad 800 million, as we did in the 6 years of socialism, more than we earned, in the 8 years of Conservative government, we have earned abroad 1,600 millions more than we have spent. But how have we done it? Not by nationalization, not by controls, not certainly by extravagance, but by letting people free, under the general guidance of the government, do their own job without the government interfering in everything. Anyway, nationalization is just as bad by the back door as by the front door, perhaps worse. For it is all these private enterprises which are now threatened, which provide our exports, our jobs, and of course a great part of the revenue. We've got rid of socialism. Don't let it come back. Let's go right ahead with our practical plans for advances all along the line over the next 5 years. But of course it isn't only for ourselves, for our own material prosperity. We've got a job to do in the world. And if Britain is free and solvent, we can do it. I made a great tour through the Commonwealth 2 years ago, and I was tremendously impressed by the way that all the countries of the Commonwealth, the old countries, Australia and Canada, settled by the British, and the Asiatic countries, which are full partners with us, look to Britain, this little island here, for help, strength. And of course, we can only give them that out of our strength, out of our wealth, investment, and so forth. We can't do it if we're bankrupt ourselves. And then look at this globe. How sad it is to feel that it's divided into the two great groups, communists of the world, East and West. We've avoided war, we've avoided an outbreak in all these years. But all the same, I have felt that something more was needed. And we ought really to try some pacification, some way of seeing that these two groups can live together side by side. In the search for this, I've traveled a lot, seen a lot of people, made many visits to President Eisenhower, to the French visitors, President de Gaulle, Dr. Adenauer, and that was really the reason that I made with the Foreign Secretary a journey to Moscow in February. But of course we haven't solved these matters yet. We've a long way to go. But I would say this: we're far better placed than we were. Then we were under an ultimatum. Now we are going to enter into these negotiations with free discussion, not under threat, but freely. And I'm not naturally, I hope, so vain or foolish as to think that I and my colleagues have any special qualification for this task. But what we shall be is a government which is united on all these great issues, which knows its own mind, and which have, I hope, a strong majority in Parliament and will be able to speak for Britain as a whole. But in this, just as in the job of helping the Commonwealth, Britain has got to be strong. It's got to be respected if it's going to give the lead, and I think it has given the lead, if it's going to maintain its duty to lead and play a great role in these great affairs. Well, I've just got one final word that I would like to say to you. One last thought. I've reading the Socialist Manifesto. I think a lot of it's exaggerated. But I like the title, Britain Belongs to You. All the same, it isn't the whole truth. Britain doesn't belong to any of us, not of a single generation. In a famous phrase, a nation is a partnership between the living, the dead, and those yet to be born. We're trustees, not owners. And this is far too big a trust to be played with or gambled with. I read a few days ago a speech by the wisest and the greatest of Englishmen today, perhaps the greatest of all time. And this is what he said: "To build," said Sir Winston Churchill, "is the laborious task of years. To destroy can be the foolish act of a single day." I would like you to think that over between now and next Thursday. Think over the trust which you hold for yourselves, your children, and your grandchildren. Then I believe you will decide that ours is the best way for the next 5 years.
That was an election broadcast on behalf of the Conservative and Unionist Party. In tomorrow's extensive Eurovision hookup for our series With Europe in View, Aidan Crawley will introduce a discussion on Will Science Destroy Faith? Speakers, hundreds of